In the heart of Lagos, where billionaires rule the skyline and power shifts with every whispered deal, one man vanished on the eve of his greatest triumph. But this disappearance was no ordinary kidnapping. What began as a billionaire's dangerous game to test loyalty spiraled into a battle for his empire, his soul, and his heart. And at the center of it all, a woman who had nothing, yet risked everything to save him. This is not just a story of wealth. It's a story of betrayal, passion, and the kind of love no money can ever buy. Lagos wakes up to shocking news: the disappearance of Nigeria's youngest tech billionaire, stirring a storm of whispers and suspicion. The city of Lagos never truly sleeps. Its nights hum with restless energy. The glow of neon lights bouncing off Victoria Island's high-rises, the endless traffic horns, the voices that never fade. But on this particular morning, something cut through the noise like a blade: the disappearance of Chike Nwadinobi. At just 34, Chike was the crown jewel of Nigeria's new wealth, the prodigy who built a digital empire out of algorithms and ambition. His name had become synonymous with innovation, disruption, and excess. To the world, he was the poster child of possibility, a billionaire before 40, a man whose face graced magazine covers from Lagos to London, whose tailored suits and fleet of private cars had made him a symbol of modern African affluence. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a man who could buy anything, except trust. That morning, TV stations carried breaking news banners in crimson: Nigeria's youngest tech billionaire missing. Radio stations buzzed with callers speculating if it was a kidnap, a hostile takeover, or a scandal waiting to explode. Online, hashtags like #FindChike trended, with conspiracy theories multiplying like wildfire. The timing was more than suspicious. The night before his disappearance, Chike had been scheduled to unveil his most audacious project yet: a Pan-African digital bank that promised to shake the foundations of traditional finance. Investors had flown in from Dubai, Johannesburg, and New York. Government officials had RSVP'd. Cameras were ready to broadcast history in the making. And then, nothing. No red carpet, no flashing lights, no Chike. Inside his sprawling island mansion, walls of glass overlooking the Atlantic, infinity pools stretching into the horizon, everything was frozen in silence. His Rolls-Royce Phantom sat untouched in the garage. His private jet remained fueled on the runway at Murtala Mohammed Airport, waiting for a trip that never came. His staff, dressed in crisp uniforms, moved nervously through the marble halls, whispering questions none of them had answers to. But in truth, the emptiness had begun long before that morning. For all his opulence, Chike carried a torment he never spoke of aloud. To the world, he was surrounded by friends, associates, lovers who clung to him like shadows. But in his heart, he knew most stayed for what his money could provide. Every betrayal had carved deeper scars into his soul. A business partner who siphoned millions behind his back, a childhood friend who leaked secrets to the press, a lover who left him the moment a richer man whispered promises of yachts and Parisian diamonds. His closest circle reflected a grim reality. There was Obinna, his sharp-tongued CFO, who had grown restless in Chike's shadow, dreaming of his own empire. There was Ngozi, his cousin, and legal head, who smiled sweetly at family dinners, but quietly questioned why his fortune had not been spread wider among the clan. There was Emeka, his flamboyant best friend, always on Instagram flaunting wealth that was not entirely his own. They all smiled at him in public, but behind closed doors, they were already circling. For Chike, the weight of success had become suffocating. He remembered the words of his late mother, whispered to him as a boy in their modest Enugu home before wealth rewrote their lives. "My son, money will fill your hands, but never your heart. When the crowd cheers too loudly, be careful, because silence means they've left you." He had laughed at her then, young and ambitious. But now, in the glittering silence of his mansion, her voice haunted him. The public only saw the headlines: Forbes Africa covers, international awards, photos of him beside presidents and monarchs. They didn't see the moments when he sat alone at his dining table, the food going cold, the silence louder than the ocean waves outside. They didn't see him pacing through hallways built of glass and steel, asking himself if anyone would still stand beside him if the money vanished. And then, just as his empire stood at its brightest, he vanished. Speculations ran wild. Business rivals took him out. Someone in his inner circle betrayed him. It's political. Too many powerful people wanted him gone. It must be a kidnapping. No Nigerian billionaire escapes that fate forever. But behind the whispers, behind the headlines, behind the carefully spun narratives of the media, one truth remained invisible to the world. Chike Nwadinobi was not kidnapped. No gang had stormed his mansion in the dead of night. No rival had spirited him away. He had not been snatched at the airport or dragged from the luxury of his chauffeured cars. The reality was stranger, more dangerous, because Chike had orchestrated his own disappearance. The country believed a billionaire had been stolen from them. In truth, Chike was hiding, watching, testing, waiting. What he didn't know was that his greatest gamble would cost him everything he thought he understood about love, trust, and survival. The dangerous game begins. The billionaire who faked his kidnapping to test love and loyalty. For years, Chike had built a fortress of glass and steel around himself. Not just his mansion or his offices in Victoria Island, but invisible walls forged from wealth, power, and suspicion. He smiled at parties, shook hands in boardrooms, posed for cameras, but deep down, he was tired. Tired of looking into eyes that sparkled only when his credit card flashed. Tired of kisses that tasted more of calculation than affection. Tired of voices that praised him in public, only to curse his name in private. So he made a decision, one as dangerous as it was reckless. If money could buy loyalty, then only absence could reveal the truth. The plan began quietly, almost like another business transaction. No one could know, not even his closest circle. He reached out to a fixer, known only in whispers, a man who moved in the shadows of Lagos, where power, money, and secrets exchanged hands more swiftly than cash. Nobody knew his real name. Chike called him Caleb. Caleb promised him invisibility. Through sophisticated disguises, burner phones, and hidden locations, he orchestrated a vanishing act that would fool the world. Drones and hidden cameras were planted throughout Chike's mansion and offices. Every corridor, every boardroom, even his private gym became silent witnesses to human truth. The devices were small, nearly invisible, feeding data into encrypted servers Chike could access from anywhere. The stage was set. Chike Nwadinobi, Nigeria's brightest billionaire, would disappear without a trace. From his first safe house, a modest apartment hidden among the crowded sprawl of Surulere, he watched the world react. His eyes burned with sleeplessness as screens lit up before him, each one carrying fragments of his life without him. Family, staff, friends, associates, enemies. The staff gathered in hushed tones, shock turning into fear. His cousin Ngozi moved with sharp precision, already securing access to documents. His CFO, Obinna, met with board members, assuring them the company would survive with the right leadership. His so-called best friend, Emeka, gave an emotional interview on television, yet, 2 hours later, Chike watched him drinking champagne in Ikoyi, boasting about freedom at last. The betrayal stung like acid. Chike sat in the dim room, fingers digging into his temples as memories assaulted him. A lover who once whispered forever, but was caught weeks later on another man's yacht. A childhood friend who had begged for a business opportunity, only to embezzle millions. A partner who smiled across the table in public while secretly signing deals with rivals in Dubai. One by one, the flashbacks returned like ghosts, and he realized his empire was built not just on algorithms and apps, but on a fragile network of human greed. Now, absence was exposing them. At the same time, Chike monitored social media through Caleb's secure servers. Every second, hashtags climbed higher. Bring back Chike. Pray for Chike. Justice for our billionaire. Some users poured out prayers, videos of young men in internet cafes calling him an inspiration. Others speculated darkly. This is what happens when you step on powerful toes. Conspiracy threads grew wilder. Politicians, business rivals, even foreign governments were blamed. Chike leaned back, watching the chaos he had engineered. A strange satisfaction rose in him. For once, no one knew where he was. No one could demand his attention. No one could claim his spotlight. He was finally invisible. Yet, amid that satisfaction, an emptiness grew, because as he scrolled, one thought gnawed at him. Who among them would truly cry if I never returned? Caleb entered the room that evening, dressed in his usual muted colors, face unreadable. He looked at Chike with eyes that saw too much. "You're playing with fire, sir," he said quietly. "Games like this never end the way you expect. People are predictable, but not in the ways you want them to be." Chike smirked, masking his unease. "I'm not afraid of truth." Caleb shook his head. "Truth is never what you imagine, and when it comes, it burns." That warning lingered long after Caleb left. Chike tried to drown it out with endless streams of footage. Ngozi whispering with lawyers, Obinna plotting with investors, Emeka throwing lavish parties. Each betrayal confirmed the emptiness he already knew, and yet, was he prepared for the answer when no one remained loyal? By the end of the week, the empire he had built was already shifting without him. His absence wasn't just exposing loyalties, it was inviting ambition. His enemies were circling their footsteps louder with every passing day. Deals were being signed, shares exchanged, narratives rewritten. The world was moving on, faster than he imagined. One night, as rain hammered the tin roof of his safe house, Chike sat surrounded by screens, his chest heavy with unspoken grief. For the first time, doubt seeped into him. Maybe his mother had been right. Money could fill hands, but never hearts. Maybe in chasing the truth, he was only confirming his worst fears, that nobody loved him, not really. It was near midnight when he heard it, the soft scrape of metal against the door. At first, he thought it was the rain, but then came the whisper of footsteps on the stairs, deliberate, careful. His breath stilled. Caleb had promised secrecy, and the apartment's location was known to no one else. He stood, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The lock clicked. Slowly, the door creaked open, and into the dim light stepped not a kidnapper, not a rival, not Caleb, but a woman whose eyes burned with something he could not yet name. Chike's carefully staged game had just been breached. But by who? And why was she here? Enter Adaobi, the girl who shouldn't be there. The door creaked open, slicing through the silence like a blade. Chike's pulse quickened, his eyes narrowing as he braced himself for whoever dared breach his carefully crafted sanctuary. And then she stepped in. Not a gangster, not an enemy in a tailored suit, but a young woman, tall, slender, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce straight through the shadows. She carried no weapon, only a plastic bag of food and bottled water, her shoulders squared as though daring the room to challenge her presence. "Caleb sent me," she said flatly, her voice low but steady. Chike stared, his mind scrambling. Caleb never mentioned anyone else, especially not a woman. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone sharp with suspicion. She dropped the bag on the table, unfazed. "The one making sure you don't starve while you play hide-and-seek with your rich friends." Her name, he would later learn, was Adaobi, 27, born in Port Harcourt, a woman who once dreamed of becoming a doctor, fueled by late-night study sessions and borrowed textbooks. But life had other plans. Her father, a dock worker, had died in a port accident when she was 16. Her mother fell sick soon after, and Adaobi's dream of medical school evaporated into the reality of unpaid hospital bills. With 3 younger siblings to feed, she found herself trapped in an endless cycle of survival, taking odd jobs, hustling in markets, and eventually working for people like Caleb. She hadn't chosen this world of secrets and schemes. It had chosen her. Now here she was, standing in the hideout of Nigeria's youngest billionaire, A man whose name filled headlines while hers was barely whispered outside her neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on her. At first, she treated him with the disdain of someone unimpressed by gold-plated crowns. "So this is what the rich do for fun?" she scoffed, setting down the food. "Fake kidnappings, secret hideouts. Do you also fake heartbreaks and funerals?" Cheek's mouth opened, but no reply came. He was used to flattery, fear, or at least polite curiosity. Never mockery. Her bluntness disarmed him more than any threat could have. "I didn't ask for you to be here," he snapped. "Good," she shot back, crossing her arms, "because I didn't ask either." Their eyes locked, his filled with pride and suspicion, hers blazing with an honesty that was almost offensive in its rawness. From the first moment, they clashed. He, with the arrogance of a man accustomed to control. She, with the sharp tongue of someone who had nothing to lose. He measured people by loyalty and betrayal. She measured them by how real they dared to be. She saw him for what he was, a spoiled man playing with fire, testing the world as if consequences were optional. She had no patience for his experiments, no reverence for his billions, and he, for the first time, found himself unable to dismiss someone's words. As days passed, Adaobi became a reluctant constant in his exile. She brought meals, sometimes sitting across the table, eating silently, while he observed her with quiet curiosity. She wasn't like anyone he had known. No manicured nails, no designer perfume, no carefully rehearsed compliments. Her presence was unfiltered. He caught himself studying her, how her brows furrowed when she was annoyed, how her voice softened when she spoke about her siblings, how her laughter, rare and fleeting, carried no pretension. One evening, as rain pattered against the window, Chike finally asked, "Why do you work for someone like Caleb?" She looked at him with a mixture of defiance and weariness. "Because dreams don't pay hospital bills. Because when life corners you, you stop asking why and start asking how to survive." Her words sank into him. He thought of his own mother's voice, of the gulf between his marble floors and her cracked ones, and for the first time, he wondered what life must look like from her side of the glass. But Adaobi, sharp as ever, didn't let sentiment linger. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Chike Nwadinobi, do you really think the world will mourn you? Or are you just enjoying the drama of your own absence?" The question stung, because deep inside, that was the truth he didn't want to face. Yet, for all her disdain, Adaobi began to sense something odd. Caleb's instructions had been simple. Deliver food, check in, report back. But as she observed the setup, the hidden monitors, the encrypted feeds, the files stacked neatly in drawers, she realized Chike wasn't the only one playing a game. Caleb had planted systems Adaobi hadn't been told about. Channels that didn't connect to Chike's screens. Encrypted files he didn't know existed. A hidden layer to the experiment. One night, when Chike had drifted to sleep on the worn-out couch, Adaobi quietly explored the safe house. Her eyes caught the faint glow of a second router tucked behind a cabinet, blinking in patterns too deliberate to be idle. She followed the wires, her heart pounding, until she uncovered a device she'd never seen before. Something that connected not to Chike's network, but to an external feed. She froze. Caleb wasn't just helping Chike vanish. He was also feeding information elsewhere. Adaobi's pulse raced as she backed away, staring at the sleeping billionaire across the room. The man thought he was in control, orchestrating his own disappearance, pulling strings no one else could see. But he was wrong. Because in that moment, Adaobi realized the truth. Chike wasn't just the player of a dangerous game. He was also a pawn. As Adaobi closed the cabinet quietly, her eyes burned with the weight of the discovery. Caleb's scheme ran deeper than Chike knew, and now she had to decide whether to keep silent or tell him the truth. The secret Adaobi uncovers changes everything. Adaobi lay awake long after Chike drifted into restless sleep, her discovery burning like fire in her chest. That second router, the encrypted feeds, the hidden device, none of it had been mentioned in Caleb's instructions. She had been told this was a job about logistics, food, delivery, routine check-ins. But now she knew better. Caleb wasn't just orchestrating Chike's disappearance. He was orchestrating something far larger. The next morning, she placed the food tray down more loudly than usual, forcing Chike awake. He rubbed his eyes, groggy and annoyed. "You need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. "What now?" His tone carried the arrogance of a man still believing he controlled the game. Adaobi pointed toward the cabinet she had carefully closed the night before. "Your fixer is running something you don't know about. He's not just hiding you, he's sabotaging you." Chike blinked at her, then gave a short laugh. "Sabotaging me? Do you even know who Caleb is? He's the best there is. He works for me." "No," Adaobi said firmly, crossing her arms. "You work for him. You just don't see it yet." The sharpness in her voice cut through the air. Chike frowned, his pride bristling at the accusation. He had built an empire by outsmarting rivals twice his age, by seeing 10 steps ahead of everyone else. Yet here was this woman, barely known to him, suggesting he was the fool. "I don't have time for your suspicions," he muttered, walking to the screens. But Adaobi wouldn't let go. She told him about the device, about the hidden connections. She described how Caleb's support was feeding more than just his surveillance, data streams going elsewhere, perhaps to rivals or enemies. "You're not testing loyalty anymore," she said, her eyes unwavering. "You're being stripped, slowly, quietly, and you're too blind to notice." Chike's first instinct was disbelief. He dismissed her words as paranoia. Yet something unsettled him. He turned back to the screens, scanning news headlines as if seeking proof. And there it was. Obina meets with Dubai investors. Nwadinobi Holdings set for restructuring vote. Ngozi advocates new leadership for stability. Every headline was a knife to the chest. They weren't mourning him. They weren't waiting for him. They were dismantling him. His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. Still, his pride refused to bow. "It doesn't mean Caleb betrayed me. It means they're showing their true colors. This was the point of the experiment." Adaobi leaned forward, her voice sharp with frustration. "Then face them. If you want to know who loves you, return and see it with your own eyes. What are you afraid of?" The words hung heavy between them. Chike turned away, staring at the rain-streaked window. He wanted to say nothing frightened him, that humiliation was beneath him. But inside, fear gnawed at him. Fear that if he stepped back into the spotlight, he would not be welcomed as a genius who outsmarted the world, but as a fool who orchestrated his own downfall. He swallowed the silence. "You don't understand," he said softly. "I understand more than you think," Adaobi replied. "I've lived humiliation. I've lived survival. You've only lived applause. That's why. This terrifies you." Her words pierced deeper than he wanted to admit. Over the days that followed, tension between them grew thick. Their conversations turned sharp, then softened unexpectedly, only to clash again. Adaobi's intelligence shone in ways Chike hadn't anticipated. She broke down investor patterns, predicted which partners were likely to defect, and suggested strategies that sounded uncomfortably practical. "You built your empire on algorithms," she told him one night, pushing aside her half-eaten plate. "But algorithms don't rebuild trust. People do. If you really want to rise again, stop hiding behind screens and start fighting for what matters." For the first time in his life, Chike found himself valuing a woman not for her beauty, not for her charm, not for her connections, but for her mind. Her insights unsettled him because they forced him to confront truths he had buried. And yet, he was drawn to that fire. It wasn't the kind of attraction he was used to. It wasn't about possession or performance. It was about someone standing across from him, unafraid, unshaken, unwilling to bow. Still, his pride clung tightly. "I can't just reappear," he muttered late one evening. "They'll laugh. They'll mock me. They'll call me unstable." Adaobi's eyes hardened. "So you'd rather watch everything you built collapse? Sit here while others write your story for you?" The silence that followed was thunderous. Finally she stood, her voice trembling not with fear, but with conviction. "I'm not going to sit here and watch you destroy yourself. If you won't trust me, then I'll leave." You can stay in your little cage of pride, and when the world forgets your name, you'll know it was because you were too afraid to fight." Her words shook him more than he expected. For years, people had begged to stay in his orbit, begged for scraps of his attention. Nobody had ever threatened to leave. And now, the one person who saw him clearly, who spoke with honesty instead of flattery, was ready to walk away. Chike stared at her, torn between pride and desperation, realizing that if Adaobi left, he might lose the only ally who could save him, from Caleb, from betrayal, and from himself. The reluctant partnership begins. For 2 days after Adaobi's ultimatum, the silence between them was thick enough to choke on. Chike busied himself with the monitors, eyes fixed on graphs and headlines, pretending not to care whether she stayed or left. Adaobi, on the other hand, moved with deliberate detachment, placing food on the table without a word, retreating to her corner with a book or her phone, making it clear she wouldn't fight for his attention. But beneath his pride, Chike felt a quiet panic. The thought of her leaving lingered like a shadow in every corner of the room. For the first time in his life, someone's presence wasn't guaranteed by his wealth. And that realization unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Finally, on the third night, he broke the silence. "Show me," he said. Adaobi looked up from her seat, her eyes questioning. "Show me what you see. The patterns. The moves I'm missing." His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of arrogance, tinged with reluctant respect. She didn't smile, but something softened in her gaze. Without a word, she stood and joined him at the glowing screens. Together, they began to study the empire from afar. Adaobi moved with surprising confidence, scrolling through online chatter, analyzing hashtags, mapping the conversations that trended across regions. She pointed out things he had overlooked, small details hidden in the noise. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a thread. "Your cousin Ngozi isn't just pushing for restructuring. She's rallying the family behind her. She's turning your absence into an argument for collective power." Chike frowned, leaning closer. He hadn't noticed. "And Obina," Adaobi continued. "He's not just courting Dubai investors. He's using your disappearance to frame himself as the steady hand. The narrative is shifting. You're not the genius who built this empire. You're the reckless boy who disappeared." Her analysis cut deep, but he couldn't deny the truth. "You see all this?" "How?" he asked, almost in disbelief. Adaobi shrugged. "When survival depends on reading people, you learn to notice what others ignore. The same way I knew you weren't as untouchable as you act." Their eyes met. For the first time, he saw her not as an intruder, but as someone who carried a strength his billions couldn't buy. As the hours turned into nights, their conversations shifted. Conflict gave way to reluctant connection. Chike found himself talking, not as the billionaire prodigy, but as the boy from Enugu who once slept in a single-room flat with cracked walls and the sound of generators humming outside. He spoke of his father, a man obsessed with wealth, who worked himself into an early grave chasing bigger contracts, always demanding more from Chike, never pausing to say he was proud. He spoke of his mother, gentle and wise, who warned him that wealth without love was a curse. Her voice haunted him still. "Chike, don't let gold bury your heart." For years he had ignored her words. Now, in the silence of the safe house, they returned with startling clarity. Adaobi listened quietly, her eyes reflecting not pity, but understanding. When he fell silent, she shared her own story. She told him about Port Harcourt, the scent of the docks, the laughter of siblings in cramped rooms, the way her dreams of becoming a doctor dissolved when her father died. She spoke of nights working 3 jobs, of debts piling higher than hope, of learning resilience not from choice, but from necessity. "Poverty doesn't just take food from your table," she said softly. "It takes the future from your hands. But you learn to fight, because if you don't, the world swallows you whole." Her words lingered in the air, raw and unvarnished. A fragile bond began to form between them, delicate but undeniable. Respect, woven with unspoken attraction. They found themselves lingering longer at the table, laughing unexpectedly at small jokes, sharing silences that felt less heavy and more intimate. One evening, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Chike watched her tuck a stray braid behind her ear, her face lit by the glow of the screen. Something in his chest shifted, foreign and unsettling. He realized that for the first time in years, he wanted to be seen not as Chike the billionaire, but simply as a man. And she, unfiltered, unafraid, was seeing him exactly that way. Their stolen moments in hiding grew emotionally charged. The brush of hands when passing a file, the quiet laughter that broke their guarded facades, the way silence between them now felt charged with something unnamed. It was terrifying and exhilarating. But just as the bond deepened, reality stormed back in. Late one night, the door slammed open. Caleb stepped in, his presence filling the room with quiet menace. His eyes flicked from Chike to Adaobi, sharp as a blade. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cold. Chike tensed. "What do you mean?" "You were supposed to observe, to remain detached. But now—" Caleb's gaze cut toward Adaobi, his lip curling with disdain. "Now you're letting her cloud your judgment." The room crackled with tension. Adaobi's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Chike, for the first time, found himself standing between Caleb's authority and her quiet defiance. Caleb's voice dropped lower, like a storm about to break. "This wasn't part of the plan. And if you think you can trust her more than me, you're making a grave mistake." The fixer's fury had erupted, and Chike knew the fragile alliance he had built with Adaobi was about to be tested. For the first time, he would have to choose loyalty to the man who orchestrated his vanishing, or trust in the woman who was slowly unraveling his walls. Betrayal in the shadows. Caleb's gaze lingered on Adaobi, sharp and accusing, like a predator studying prey. The room seemed smaller with him inside, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You think you're clever, Chike," he said, pacing slowly. "You think you staged this disappearance to control the narrative. But while you hide in shadows, your empire doesn't sleep. It doesn't wait. It is being carved apart, piece by piece." Chike's brows knitted. "What are you talking about?" Caleb's smile was thin, cruel. "Obina sells off your assets under the guise of stability. Ngozi courts investors behind your back. Emeka? He's already flaunting your cars like they belong to him. And who do you think is letting them move so freely? Who do you think made it all possible?" The air left Chike's lungs. His chest tightened as realization dawned. This wasn't just betrayal by his circle. It was Caleb himself. "You," his voice cracked, "you've been feeding them?" Caleb's laugh was bitter. "Feeding? No. Steering, guiding. I made you disappear, Chike. And in your absence, I'm building a new order. Do you know what's worth more than a billionaire? A billionaire's silence." The words crashed over Chike like a wave. His grand experiment, his test of love and loyalty, had become the very tool of his downfall. In trying to expose the fakeness around him, he had handed the keys of his empire to the one man who thrived on shadows. Adaobi stepped forward, fury flashing in her eyes. "You're destroying him. You're not helping. You're selling him like scraps at a market." Caleb's head snapped toward her. His voice dripped with disdain. "And who are you? A girl dragged into this job by chance. A distraction, nothing more." The insult cut, but Adaobi stood her ground. Sometimes distractions are the only things that save people from themselves. Chike's jaw tightened. For years, he had watched people belittle others on his behalf, and he had let it pass. But this time, something inside him shifted. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Don't talk to her like that." Caleb's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "You defend her? Against me?" "Yes," Chike said, surprising even himself. "She has seen more clearly in weeks than you ever have. Maybe I was blind to trust you, Caleb, but I'm not blind anymore." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Adaobi's heart pounded, equal parts fear and something deeper, something that warmed her even in the shadow of danger. Caleb's lips curled into a sneer. Very well. If you choose her, then you lose me. And if you lose me, you lose everything. His fingers moved with deliberate calm, typing commands into the laptop on the desk. Within seconds, the screens flickered, one by one, going black. The heartbeat of Chike's empire, the data feeds, the surveillance, the accounts, vanished in silence. Caleb stood, satisfied. You're cut off now. No eyes, no ears, no access to your billions. Let's see how long loyalty and love can feed you. And with that, he walked out, leaving the safe house steeped in silence. Chike sank into the chair, his body heavy with despair. All the wealth, the power, the influence, gone in a keystroke. Adaobi hesitated, torn. Helping him meant risking her own fragile survival, but leaving him now would mean abandoning the one person who, for all his flaws, had begun to see her not as a pawn, not as a distraction, but as a person. So she stayed. In that isolation, the walls between them dissolved further. They cooked simple meals together, shared water from the same bottle, stayed up long into the night talking, not about strategy or betrayal, but about life, about the things they feared, the things they wanted, the things they thought they had lost forever. One evening, when the power flickered and the room was lit only by the dim glow of a candle, Chike spoke softly. I used to think wealth protected me, that it made me invincible, but sitting here now, stripped of everything, it feels like I'm meeting myself for the first time. Adaobi looked at him, her eyes shimmering. And what do you see? Chike swallowed. His voice was barely a whisper. A man who doesn't deserve you. For a moment, the silence was louder than any words. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their first kiss was fragile, hesitant, as though both feared the world might shatter if their lips lingered too long. It wasn't the desperate passion of wealth and power. It was the trembling, delicate acknowledgement of two souls who had collided against all odds. When they pulled back, both were breathless, both terrified by what had just unfolded. And yet, for the first time in weeks, Chike felt a spark of hope. But hope was fragile. Because even as his heart settled into this new rhythm, he noticed something in Adaobi's eyes. Something she wasn't saying, a weight she carried alone. And in that moment, he knew. She was keeping a secret. Just as Chike begins to trust her, he realizes Adaobi is hiding something, something that could change everything. Adaobi's hidden truth. The air was heavy in the safe house after their first kiss, silence settling like a blanket neither dared to lift. For a few hours, hope flickered, fragile but alive. Yet beneath Adaobi's quiet smiles and steady presence, Chike sensed it. A shadow, a secret. That night, as they sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, Chike finally spoke. "What are you hiding from me?" His voice was low, steady, but the weight of it filled the room. Adaobi froze. For the first time since he met her, her sharp eyes faltered. She looked away, her hands twisting together as though trying to wring out the truth. "I wasn't going to tell you," she whispered, "but you deserve to know." Chike leaned forward, his heartbeat quickening. "I used to work," she said slowly, "for one of your rivals, briefly. I didn't know where it would lead. They offered me money to keep tabs on you during your disappearance." Her words struck like lightning. Chike's body stiffened, his jaw tightening. "You, what?" "I wasn't spying on your secrets," she rushed. "It wasn't like that. They just wanted to know if you were alive, where you were. I didn't tell them much, I swear, but I took their money." The betrayal hit harder than any boardroom coup, harder than any backstabbing friend. Because it was her, the one he had begun to trust, to lean on, to believe in. His chest felt hollow. "So you're just like the rest," he muttered, rising to his feet. His voice was sharp, bitter. "Everyone has a price, and you, of course, you found yours." Adaobi stood too, tears filling her eyes. "It wasn't about me. It was for my siblings. My brother's school fees were overdue. My sister needed medical bills paid. Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I wanted to be caught between men like Caleb and your rivals? I was desperate. Her voice cracked, trembling with raw honesty. I never wanted to hurt you. You were supposed to be just another job. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being a job. Chike turned away, staring at the darkened screens, his reflection fractured against the black glass. Inside his chest, a storm raged. Of course, another betrayal. Another person who smiled while holding a knife. His mind spun back to all the ghosts of his past, the lovers who left when his bank balance dipped, the friends who traded his secrets for fame, the partners who siphoned millions behind his back. Every scar on his soul whispered the same lesson. No one is real. No one stays. Was Adaobi just another wound waiting to happen? Adaobi sank to the couch, her shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought I could carry it alone, but I can't. For hours, Chike said nothing. The silence stretched deep into the night, broken only by the sound of her quiet sobs. And in that silence, his own mind betrayed him. He thought of his mother's words, of her soft voice warning him that money could not buy truth. He thought of how his distrust had poisoned every relationship, driving him to isolation, pushing him into this very experiment. Maybe his curse wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was his inability to believe in anyone. He glanced at Adaobi, curled on the couch, her face buried in her hands. This wasn't the polished betrayal of a rival in a boardroom. This was a woman, broken and human, crying not for money or power, but for the family she had sacrificed everything to protect. And in her tears, he saw something he had never seen in the glittering world of wealth. Humanity. By dawn, Chike made his choice. When Adaobi stirred, puffy-eyed and weary, she found him sitting across from her. His voice was soft, stripped of pride. I should hate you. I should push you away. But if I do, I'll become the man I've always been, alone, suspicious, empty. She looked at him, breath caught. I forgive you, he said simply. Her tears returned, but this time they carried relief. She reached for his hand hesitantly, and when he didn't pull away, she clung to it as though anchoring herself to something solid for the first time in years. From that moment, the bond between them shifted, stronger, clearer, forged not in perfection, but in brokenness. They rebuilt what had fractured, piece by piece. Their conversations deepened, their laughter returned, and though doubt lingered like a ghost, love, unspoken but undeniable, began to fill the spaces left behind. But the world outside was not standing still. That evening, as Chike finally dared to relax into the warmth of forgiveness, Adaobi's phone buzzed with an alert. She froze, then handed it to him. The headline blazed across the screen. Breaking. Nwadinobi Holdings. Faces complete takeover. Investors move to replace absent founder. The empire was collapsing. As Chike and Adaobi's bond strengthens in private, the world outside moves to erase his legacy completely. The question is no longer whether he can forgive, but whether he can reclaim what is slipping through his fingers. The empire crumbles. The fall of an empire does not always happen with explosions or flames. Sometimes it unravels quietly, thread by thread, until the grand fabric lies in tatters. For Chike, it began with the headlines. From their dimly lit safe house, he and Adaobi watched the world dismantle everything he had built. Screens flickered with updates. Nwadinobi Holdings announces emergency vote. Founder declared incompetent in his absence. Luxury cars and yachts linked to missing billionaire headed for auction. Chike sat motionless, his hand pressed against his mouth, his eyes hollow. He had envisioned betrayal before, expected it even. But seeing it unfold in real time was a different kind of agony. His friends, his family, his carefully chosen executives, people who had once bowed their heads when he entered a room, were now slicing his name apart with clinical precision. They're calling you reckless, Adaobi said softly, scrolling through another report. Some even say you abandoned the company on purpose. Chike exhaled sharply, bitterness twisting his words. Maybe I did. Maybe this is exactly what I deserve." Adaobi turned toward him, her expression fierce. "Don't say that." His voice cracked under the weight of despair. "Look at it, Adaobi. Everything I built, gone. They'll strip me of the board, liquidate my assets, and by next month, I'll be a headline people scroll past on their way to gossip about the next billionaire scandal. Do you understand? I'll be nothing." For a long moment, silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Adaobi leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "No, Chike, you'll never be nothing. They can take your cars, your jets, your glass towers, but they can't take you. Your mind, your vision, your name. That's the real empire. And it still belongs to you." Her words struck something inside him, a spark in the ashes of his despair. He looked at her, really looked at her, the determination etched into her face, the unshakable fire in her voice. She believed in him when he no longer believed in himself. He whispered, almost to himself, "What if I don't know how to start again?" Adaobi placed her hand gently over his. "Then start small. Start real. For once in your life, stop building for applause. Build for truth. Build for people who actually need it." The simplicity of her words cut deeper than any strategy. For years he had designed systems for investors, for governments, for the elite. But what if, just once, he designed something for the everyday Nigerian hustling on the street, the market woman who couldn't open a bank account, the student scraping coins for data bundles? Together they began to brainstorm. Late nights stretched into dawns as they scribbled ideas on scraps of paper, debated over the glow of the laptop, argued, and then laughed over possibilities. Adaobi's insights shocked him. She knew the struggles of the common man in a way he never could. She understood the rhythms of markets, the small betrayals of poverty, the needs that billion-dollar banks never considered. "You're thinking too big," she would say, cutting through his polished strategies. "Start with something simple, something people can touch, trust, use today. Do that, and they'll follow you anywhere." Slowly, Chike began to see her not as an assistant, not even as a muse, but as an equal, someone whose mind sharpened his own, whose ideas challenged him in ways his board had never dared. And in those late nights, between arguments and laughter, something deeper bloomed. Their bond, fragile at first, grew into something undeniable. She was no longer just the woman who fed him during exile, nor the girl with secrets. She was his anchor. And he, stripped of everything, found himself falling in love, not with her beauty, but with her fire. One night, as they leaned over the same notebook, their shoulders brushing, Chike caught himself staring at her instead of the page. The light reflected in her eyes, her lips parted in concentration, her presence both grounding and electrifying. He realized with a quiet shock, this woman, who had entered his life as a stranger, was now the center of it. Adaobi, sensing his gaze, glanced up. Their eyes locked, and though no words passed, the silence was charged with a promise neither dared yet to speak aloud. But just as hope began to stitch itself into their nights, the world outside reminded them of its power. That morning, an encrypted message arrived through one of the few secure lines Chike still controlled. Adaobi opened it, her brows furrowing. She handed it to him without a word. The message was short, direct, chilling. "Meet me, midnight, Echo Hotel, K.O." Chike's stomach tightened. He knew those initials. His greatest rival, the man who had always circled his empire, waiting for a moment like this. An invitation had arrived, from the one man Chike had hoped never to face. His empire may have been crumbling, but now the battle would move into the open. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. The rival's tempting offer. The penthouse suite overlooked Lagos like a throne above a restless kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city's restless veins of traffic, the neon glow of nightlife, and the dark expanse of the Atlantic whispering against the shore. Chike stepped inside, shoulders tense, his heart beating with a mix of dread and curiosity. Seated by the window was a man he knew too well, Kelechi Okafor, known in hushed circles as K.O. Smooth, calculating, always impeccably dressed in silk and tailored suits. Kelechi was no ordinary businessman. He was the shadow that haunted Chike's rise, the rival who smiled at galas, but circled like a vulture whenever cracks appeared in his empire. "Chike," Kelechi drawled, standing with open arms. "At last, the prodigy himself graces me with his presence." Chike didn't return the smile. "You ask me here. Speak." Kelechi's laugh was low, confident. He motioned for Chike to sit, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "You've had a rough time, my friend. The newspapers feast on your downfall. Your so-called allies circle like sharks. But I—" He leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "I can give you a way out." Chike narrowed his gaze. "What kind of way out?" Kelechi sipped slowly before replying. "You don't need to fight. You don't need to crawl back to an empire that already belongs to others. I can give you anonymity, safety. I have accounts offshore, properties under discreet names. Enough for you to vanish, live quietly, without betrayal, without enemies. No more games, Chike. No more masks." The words hung in the air like a forbidden fruit. For the first time in weeks, Chike felt the weight of temptation press against him. Safety, anonymity, a life free from vultures and betrayals. He could vanish into the world, untouchable, living on islands where no one whispered his name. But as the thought flickered, Adaobi's face came to him, the fire in her eyes, the way her laughter cracked through his despair, the way her presence had become his anchor. Behind him, in the shadows of the suite, Adaobi stood quietly, watching. She had insisted on coming, unwilling to let him face Kelechi alone. Her gaze burned into him now, warning, pleading. She knew danger when she smelled it. "Don't trust him," she said softly, her voice steady but urgent. Kelechi's eyes darted toward her, his smile curdling. "Ah, the girl. You've let a distraction follow you here? How charming. But let me tell you something, Chike." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a hiss. "Love is fleeting. Power is eternal." The words sliced into Chike's mind, awakening the old echoes of his father. The same cold mantra, the same philosophy that had buried joy under wealth. For a moment, the storm inside him raged. Love versus legacy, safety versus fight. Adaobi said nothing more, but her silence was louder than any speech. She was testing him, her eyes fixed on his face, waiting to see whether he would choose her or surrender to the hollow promise of wealth without purpose. Kelechi pressed harder, sensing weakness. "You've already lost. Your empire is theirs. Why bleed yourself trying to fight? Come with me, Chike. You were never meant to be tied down by sentiment. You were meant to rule, alone, above them all." Chike's chest tightened, his reflection glaring back at him from the glass windows. For a moment, he saw 2 versions of himself. One, walking away with Kelechi, clutching anonymous riches in lonely silence. The other, scarred but standing, choosing a path built not on applause, but on something real. His decision came not with thunder, but with quiet certainty. "No," Chike said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been that man before. I've lived power without love, wealth without trust. And I was empty. You're not offering freedom, Kelechi. You're offering a coffin made of gold." Kelechi's eyes flickered with irritation. "You'll regret this." Chike stood, reaching for Adaobi's hand. She clasped it without hesitation. "I already regret the years I wasted being you. That ends now. My future is with her, not you, not your deals, not your lies." The declaration shocked even Adaobi, her breath catching. But in her eyes, pride and relief glowed like dawn breaking over the horizon. Kelechi's face hardened, the charm stripped away. He rose, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can defy me? You think love will save you? This city is mine now, and if you stand in my way, I'll make sure you both are buried beneath it." The room grew heavy with menace. Chike squeezed Adaobi's hand tighter, his resolve unshaken. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing wealth. He was afraid only of losing her. Kelechi's vow of revenge echoed through the night, promising one final battle. Chike and Adaobi had chosen love, but now they would have to survive the storm Kelechi was about to unleash. Building from the ashes. The weeks after Kelechi's threat were heavy with tension, but also with purpose. For the first time since his disappearance, Chike wasn't consumed by watching the empire he had lost. Instead, he began building something new, something stripped of the noise of yachts and skyscrapers, something rooted in truth. It started with a notebook. He and Adaobi sat cross-legged on the safe-house floor, scraps of paper scattered around them like puzzle pieces. Chike sketched diagrams, scribbled ideas, crossed them out, tried again. Adaobi leaned over his shoulder, frowning at his overly complex plans. "You're thinking like a billionaire," she teased, snatching the pen. "You need to think like the woman selling tomatoes at Balogan Market, or the Okada rider who saves coins in his pocket." Her words stung, but he smiled despite himself. She was right. His vision had always been grand, designed for applause, aimed at institutions. But Adaobi spoke for people he had never truly seen. And so, together, they designed a new kind of platform. A financial app that didn't serve the elite, but empowered ordinary Nigerians to save, borrow, and trade without being crushed by bureaucracy or exploitation. They called it a seed, small, but with the potential to grow into something unstoppable. Nights stretched into dawns, the safe house alive with arguments, laughter, and the hum of laptops. They disagreed often, Chike insisting on sleek design, Adaobi demanding simplicity. He wanted speed, she wanted trust. Their clashes filled the room with fire, but behind every argument was a mutual respect that deepened with each passing day. Sometimes their debates dissolved into laughter, spilling over bowls of noodles cooked at midnight. Other times, the exhaustion pulled them into silence, sitting side by side, shoulders touching, eyes locked on the screen, as if daring the world to stop them. And in between the work, something else grew. Something fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. One night, Chike paused mid-sentence, watching Adaobi as she typed. Her brow furrowed, her lips pursed in concentration, her presence glowing with the same fire that had kept him alive through betrayal and ruin. He realized with startling clarity that she wasn't just his companion in hiding. She wasn't just the woman who had challenged him, forgiven him, kissed him. She was his partner. In vision, in fight, in heart. Their relationship deepened, woven through late nights of whispered vulnerability. Chike confessed fears he had never shared aloud. That without wealth, he was nothing. That he had never known love without suspicion. That sometimes he wondered if even his brilliance was just luck dressed as destiny. Adaobi listened, grounding him with truth sharper than any boardroom speech. "You're not nothing," she told him, "but you will be if you keep letting fear define you." And in return, Adaobi let her walls crack. She spoke of nights when hunger hollowed her stomach, of mornings when she wanted to give up, of the guilt she carried for every dream she had abandoned to feed her siblings. Her voice trembled when she admitted how much she feared loving him, because wealth had a way of leaving people, and she had spent her life losing. But instead of retreating, Chike reached for her hand, promising silently that this time love would not walk away. When their prototype was finally ready, they took it to the streets, not to bankers or investors, but to the people Adaobi had insisted on all along. They walked through markets, phones in hand, showing traders how to use the app. They explained its functions to Okada riders, who stared at their screens with cautious excitement. They tested it with students, who laughed at its glitches, but marveled at the possibilities. For the first time in years, Chike felt alive, not because of luxury, but because he could see real people, ordinary faces, light up with hope. In a small corner of Ajagunle, an elderly woman clasped his hand after trying the app. "God bless you," she whispered. This will help us." Chike's chest tightened. That blessing was worth more than any Forbes cover. Back at the safe house that night, Adaobi watched him quietly as he leaned against the wall, his eyes still glowing from the day's success. "What?" he asked, noticing her stare. She hesitated, then whispered, "I love you." The words hung in the air, trembling, fragile. "But I'm terrified," she added, her eyes wet. "Terrified that one day you'll wake up and decide this was just a phase, that you'll leave me behind when the world calls you back." Chike stepped forward, cupping her face gently. "Adaobi," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not a phase. You're the only thing that makes this real." Their lips met again, this time with the weight of confession, of promises unspoken, but deeply felt. For a while, it felt like nothing could break them, but the world had not forgotten Chike Nwadinobi, or his enemies. Days after their grassroots launch began to attract attention, whispers of their new project spread online. Excitement turned into headlines. Investors started calling again. The platform began to gain traction far faster than they expected. And then, just as momentum built, it happened. One morning, they opened their servers to find chaos. Glitches planted deliberately, data corrupted, the system sabotaged. Everything they had built, every line of code, every fragile piece of hope was under attack. Their rebirth had barely begun, and already someone had tried to strangle it in the cradle. The question was clear. Would they rise stronger or crumble again? Love versus the world. The sabotage spread like poison. Within hours, the app that had inspired market women, students, and Okada riders was crippled. Screens froze, transactions vanished, complaints filled social media. For days, Chike and Adaobi worked without sleep, clawing through corrupted lines of code, patching holes, salvaging what they could. Then came the headline that hit harder than the sabotage itself. Breaking, mystery woman behind Nwadinobi's comeback revealed. Adaobi's face, lifted from a grainy photo in the market, plastered across television screens and tabloids. The stories that followed were merciless. "She's a manipulator," commentators sneered. "A girl from nowhere who saw her chance and clung to it." "A gold digger," another headline screamed. "From Port Harcourt to Penthouse, who really is Adaobi?" The frenzy escalated. Her humble origins, once her strength, were twisted into mockery. Talk shows dissected her background, reducing her resilience to scandalous whispers. "What's a billionaire doing with a market girl?" they laughed. Society, greedy for gossip, painted her as a schemer who had bewitched Chike in his weakest hour. Even worse, whispers began that she was the one who sabotaged the app from within. Chike sat frozen in front of the screen, jaw tight, fists clenched. Every instinct told him to storm into the world and silence the noise. But he knew the truth of power. Perception often shouted louder than facts. And right now, perception was tearing Adaobi apart. Behind him, she stood quietly, watching. Her face was calm, but her eyes shimmered with the weight of unspoken pain. "They'll never accept me," she said finally, her voice flat. "Don't say that," he replied quickly, turning to her. She shook her head, stepping back. "It's the truth. You saw the headlines. To them, I'll always be the outsider, the poor girl, the mistake. If you want to save what little remains of your brand, you need to cut ties with me. Publicly. Do it now, before it's too late." Her words pierced deeper than any betrayal ever had. Not because they were false, but because she meant them. She was ready to walk away, not for herself, but to protect him. "No," Chike said firmly, his voice shaking. Adaobi's breath caught. "Chike." "No," he repeated, louder this time. "All my life I've chosen money over people. I've chosen reputation over love. And where did it leave me? Alone. Surrounded by liars and thieves. You think I'm going to throw away the only real thing I've found because society mocks it? Never." Her lips parted, trembling. He stepped closer, his words fierce, his eyes burning. "They can keep their boardrooms, their headlines, their polished lies. Let them mock you. Let them mock me. I don't care. If standing beside you means losing everything else, then so be it. Because with you, I have more than I ever had with billions." Adaobi's tears broke free, falling silently down her cheeks. The very next day, Chike made his stand. At a packed press conference, cameras flashing, journalists jostling for sound bites, he stepped to the podium. His suit was simple, his tone unflinching. Adaobi stood at his side, her hand trembling slightly in his, but he did not let go. "You want to know who she is?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "She's Adaobi. She's the woman who stood by me when everyone else betrayed me. She's the one who helped me rebuild when I had nothing. Call her names if you want. Call her poor. Call her undeserving. But she's the only person who ever loved me without a price tag attached. And I will never, ever let her go." The room erupted, half in outrage, half in stunned silence. Some scoffed, others whispered. But the image of Chike, defying the world with her hand in his, was powerful. Overnight, their love became a symbol, not of scandal, but of defiance. Young people online rallied behind them, tweeting, "Real love, fake wealth." Street markets buzzed with pride that one of their own was standing beside a billionaire. And though the elite sneered, ordinary Nigerians began to believe in them. Yet beneath the hope, danger still simmered. For Chike's empire was gone. His old company stripped away, his assets scattered, his name still fragile. Their new venture, though born of fire and passion, stood at the edge, one misstep away from collapse, one sabotage, away from ruin. As they left the conference that night, Adaobi squeezed his hand. "We've come too far to stop now," she whispered. He nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. Because even as the world turned against them, one truth was clear. They had each other. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. Chike and Adaobi had chosen love over the world. But now the ultimate question loomed. Could their fledgling platform survive? Or would Kelechi's shadow finally crush them for good? The rebirth of love and legacy. The day of the launch felt nothing like the glittering unveilings Chike was once known for. There were no red carpets, no governors in the front row, no champagne towers reaching the ceiling. Instead, there was a small stage set up in an open-air market square, with tarpaulin covering speakers, plastic chairs for the curious crowd, and a projector balanced on crates. Yet, as Chike stood on that stage with Adaobi by his side, the energy pulsing through the crowd was louder than any gala he had ever hosted. Market women in headscarves, students in faded jeans, Okada riders leaning on their helmets, small shop owners wiping sweat from their brows. Ordinary Nigerians, the very people his old empire had overlooked, were here, gathered in hope, and all of them looked not at him, but at Adaobi. She spoke first, her voice clear and unshaken. "This platform isn't for the rich," she said. "It's for us. For the ones who have been told banking is too complicated, too expensive, too far away. This is ours." Her words rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded, hands clapped. A trader shouted, "God bless you, my daughter." For the first time, Chike didn't mind not being the center of attention. In fact, watching Adaobi command the stage, he felt something he had never known before: peace. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about ego or legacy carved in glass towers. This was about people, about something real. When the platform went live, phones lit up across the square. Laughter and gasps filled the air as traders tested it, sending money instantly, saving small amounts without hidden fees, seeing their futures shift in the glow of their screens. It spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, thousands had signed up. By the end of the month, millions. Chike watched in awe as their grassroots idea exploded beyond anything he had imagined. Bigger than his old empire, not because of its flash, but because it belonged to the people. For Adaobi, it was more than numbers. Standing beside Chike, seeing women who reminded her of her mother smile with relief, seeing children play with phones their parents now trusted to hold their savings, it was the fulfillment of a dream she had long thought dead. She hadn't become a doctor, but in her own way, she was healing lives. And through it all, their love blossomed fully, no longer hidden, no longer tentative, built on trust carved from betrayal, fire forged through storms, resilience born from choosing each other again and again. At night, When the city quieted and the hum of generators filled the air, Chike and Adaobi would sit on the balcony of their modest new apartment. Not a mansion, not a palace, just a home. They would look out over the restless lights of Lagos, hand in hand, reflecting on the journey that had dragged them from hostility to passion, from strangers to partners, from two broken souls into one shared future. Flashbacks haunted them sometimes, of the night he first mocked her, of the moment she confessed her secret, of Caleb's sneer, of Kelechi's threats. But those memories no longer brought pain. They were stepping stones, proof of how far they had come. Of course the world still judged them. The elite sneered, the magazines ran mocking headlines, the whispers at exclusive parties never ceased. The billionaire and the market girl. The fall and rise of Chike Nwadinobi. But for the first time, Chike and Adaobi no longer cared, because they had chosen each other, and that choice had become their freedom. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold over the Lagos lagoon, they stood together on a rooftop, the breeze tugging at their clothes, the city alive beneath them. Chike slipped his arm around Adaobi's shoulders, pulling her close. "They thought I was kidnapped," he murmured, his voice soft but certain. "But the truth is—" He turned, meeting her eyes, the city's lights reflecting in both their gazes. "I was found." Adaobi smiled, her fingers lacing with his. Their future was still uncertain. Rivals still lurked in shadows. The road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in his life, Chike was not afraid. Hand in hand, overlooking the city that had once cheered and mocked him, they faced the horizon, fearless, unshaken, and ready for whatever storms would come. "They thought I was kidnapped. The truth? I was found." If this story moved you, imagine what's coming next. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in love against all odds.